Hi friends! Welcome back to MCAT Sociology by the People's Tutor. Today we'll be discussing Deindividuation. If you watched my last video, you know that I sometimes like to break a word or term down to see if I can start to figure out what it means on my own. It is best to be as prepared as possible for an exam or anything you get into, but let's face it, sometimes we get stuck or are just simply caught off guard. For that reason, I find that practicing the exercise of breaking down words or terms is helpful for those hopefully rare situations. Deindividuation. De is a prefix that can mean removal, reversal, or separation. Individuation can mean to give distinctness from a group. In other words, to give individuality. So could deindividuation mean to remove individuality? In other words, to make one less of an individual and more like the group? Well, let's see. For the MCAT, you should know that deindividuation is characterized by an individual losing his or her self-awareness, self-restraint, and inhibitions in a group setting, and in place, adopting the behaviors of the group. So what can lead to deindividuation? Anonymity. In a group, an individual is less visible than when they are standing alone. This may lead to an individual doing things they normally wouldn't do. Another aspect of a group setting that can lead to deindividuation is diffused or shared responsibility. For example, if someone in a crowd shouts out obscenities or throws an object intended to hit someone, it would be hard for people to pinpoint who did it. The person who did it may have been less likely to do it if they weren't amongst a group, because then we would know it was them. They may have more courage to do it in a group because it could just as well have been anyone in the crowd, right? In this way, she or he who shouted out those obscenities and threw the object thinks the crowd will share the responsibility for his or her actions. And finally, if everyone else is doing it, it must be okay, right? Well, the answer to that question is no. But the statement is another aspect of a group setting that can lead to deindividuation. In a group where everyone is doing something, or everyone is on the same page about an issue, a behavior one normally would not engage in may feel less personally wrong, since everybody in the group agrees with it. Deindividuation is more likely to occur the larger the crowd is. The larger the crowd is, the less visible individuals are. Deindividuation is also more likely to occur the more uniform the crowd is. For example, in a group of males and females, if obscenities were yelled out in a male voice, we would guess it came from one of the males in the group. On the other hand, if it was a group of all females and one of them yelled out an obscenity, it would be harder to start to guess who did it. Other examples of uniformity are if everyone in a group was literally in uniform, like a group of soldiers, or if everyone had on masks. In these situations, it would be harder to decipher who did what. Deindividuation is also more likely to occur the more stimulating the environment is. For example, a concert with loud music and a really energetic crowd. Here's a scenario that serves as an example of deindividuation. I would like you guys to pause the video and read it, then unpause it, and we'll talk about it together. Welcome back. Now let's go through the example together. Marianne is at a sold-out concert with an audience of over 2,000 people. Josh, a local artist who Marianne has had a crush on for the longest time, is scheduled to perform next. As Marianne waits anxiously for Josh to take the stage, she thinks back to just a couple of months ago, before Josh's music career really took off, when she attended one of his performances at a much smaller venue that seated Around 70 people. She remembered how she didn't go up to get his autograph at the end of his performance when audience members were allowed to take turns talking to him one-on-one. Even though she swears he winked at her and gave her a nod to come over, being shy and reserved as usual, she didn't feel comfortable going up to chat with him, especially not by herself. Tonight, Marianne figured that she'd do the same, peep Josh in all of his handsomeness from afar. But to her surprise, she did exactly the opposite. 40 minutes into Josh's performance, she found herself screaming at the top of her lungs, "Josh! Josh! I love you!" and pushing her way through the crowd of other screaming fans, all struggling to get closer to the stage and to Josh. So let's talk about why this is an example of de-individuation. In the example, we're told about a time when Marianne had the opportunity to talk to Josh one-on-one, but didn't, even despite believing that he had showed signs of wanting her to come over and talk to him. So why now, at a location where she has less access to Josh, if any, does she finally have the courage to profess her feelings to not only him, but to a venue of 2,000 people? With what you know about de-individuation, what do you think is going on? Well, she's in a larger crowd the second time around. 2,000 people at the second venue versus 70 people at the first venue. Remember, we said that de-individuation is more likely to happen in a larger crowd? It would be hard to know who is screaming what in a noisy concert crowd of 2,000 people. Also, the crowd is uniform. It is made up of, we can assume, fans. In fact, the passage states that Marianne pushed her way through a crowd of other screaming fans, all struggling to get closer to Josh. Since there are so many people there crazy about Josh, it would be harder to decipher exactly which fan shouted the adoring words. Both the size of the crowd and the crowd being uniform provide Marianne with anonymity. So we are seeing a situation where someone becomes less like themselves and more like the crowd they're in. In other words, they're losing their individuality. Marianne, due to her surroundings at the larger venue, becomes less self-aware. In other words, she forgets she is shy and reserved and becomes courageous enough to do something she wouldn't have done alone. Marianne may also feel less evaluated. If you watched my last video, we talked about how it's a normal tendency for us as humans to feel like we're being evaluated or observed as long as others are around, even if that observation or evaluation is really not taking place. We just naturally tend to feel like we're being watched. So in a larger crowd, Marianne will feel less of that evaluation and less apprehension to do what she normally wouldn't do. And remember, with de-individuation, one feels less evaluated and less observed by others because they feel less visible within the group or crowd. Also, so many other fans are screaming and pushing their way up to the stage to get closer to Josh. So because of this, Marianne may feel more empowered to do the same and feel that this behavior is acceptable. Finally, this is a really stimulating environment, right? She's at a music concert with 2,000 people. It's probably a very loud atmosphere, and everybody's really revved up and going crazy over this artist, Josh. Although the example we just went through wasn't a violent one, de-individuation is commonly associated with anti-normative behavior such as violent crowds, when soldiers purposely kill innocent civilians during a war, lynch mobs, and riots, to name a few.